Hi, everyone. This is the SEBA call for August 6th, 2019. Just so everyone knows, these meetings are recorded and posted on YouTube, so keep that in mind during the discussion. We have one topic on the agenda today, which is the kickoff of the multi-arch brigade. As most people probably know, the brigade or the most of the SEBA team has been working on the Volta 2.0 stabilization effort. But there's also interest in getting the SEBA and Volta and other cord-related components onto running on other architectures. So we set up a multi-arch brigade to help cover to help companies and other individuals who are interested in getting SEBA working and Volta also on these other architectures. So I created a page on the wiki. We have under the community information under brigades. Currently, we don't have a lead for this, so we're actively searching that out. It would be preferable that is not somebody who has like a specific architecture in mind. If that's not possible, we can always make an exception. But fundamentally, I am going to be taking part in this as a technical mentor and doing things that are from an administrative standpoint that need to be done, like IT related. So there's a mailing list and there's a channel on Slack. I posted a few messages to the mailing list that go through technical starting points for bringing up SEBA and Volta, and then also asking for introductions. So I guess I'd like to open up the floor. If there are any people who have questions about this process or other interest, now's your time to ask questions.
Yeah, this is Jeff Catlin from EdgeCore, and I apologize. I missed the previous meetings, I think, on this topic. But can you, I don't want to drag everybody down, but could you just give an example of what a multi-architecture SEBA type piece of gear would look like? What is it, a piece of access gear, or is it a compute or a storage node in this architecture?
So we've had people who are interested in, for example, running the SEBA and Volta control plane components. So Volta, XOS, and those sorts of things on ARM hardware. And
okay.
Also, we've had interest from people who wanted to have access devices that are non-x86. So there's been some interest. So I think there's a company that has an OLT that is PowerPC based. So we're trying to figure out a way to get community involvement, and so we can support all these different architectures in a way that's sort of neutral to the architecture and allows them to be supported, especially in cases where either ONF or some of the partner organizations don't necessarily have every architecture of for at least the control plane components or these devices, and trying to help integrate that and make grow the community around these sorts of different pieces of hardware and gear. Does that make sense, Jeff?
Yeah, so let me just replay what I think I heard. So it's really just for access devices in a SEBA architecture that have different CPUs other than x86.
So right. That's one part, and also it's the compute side and access device side. So it's both.
Okay, it's both. Okay, thank you. That helps.
Yeah, yeah, I had a question. Would you consider like an architecture such as the Intel Atom or a lower cost or lower power Intel architecture being under that scope? Because I've seen some operators have interest in a lower power solution in some places.
So I guess there's the question of specific architecture support. To speak to the Atom specifically, I think that those are still x86 64, AMD 64 based units, but there are we have had some issues with at least in some of the newer products or newer projects inside of the Core umbrella. So, for example, Comac, where they had some issues compiling for CPU architectures within the x86 realm, just different instruction set levels. Newer stuff like AVX and AVX2, compiling for a specific architecture could probably be taken into account, but I guess we're trying to separate out maybe optimization for an architecture versus does it work at all.
Along those lines, I would argue that, I mean, we can decide whatever we want to, but this could easily fall down a slippery slope into certification, which wasn't really the intent. There's another brigade that's about certification.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
And in one of the mailing list messages I sent, there is some crossover there. Currently, the certification brigade, I believe, is only working on OLT and switch hardware, and if we want that to expand into specific pieces of compute hardware, that would be something to bring up with the certification brigade. Does that answer your question, Chip?
Yes, that's fine. Yeah.
Maybe Larry can answer this. What about the SEBA as a service? So potentially, some vendors or something like that may want to provide the SEBA control plane in the public or semi or hybrid cloud. So would that be part of this scenario also?
Oh, it hadn't occurred to me, but I suppose now suddenly it's not multi-architecture in ARM and x86, it's multi-architecture in this cloud provider's VM versus that cloud provider's VM and all of the hardware that's underneath it. Yeah, I mean, in principle, this is really as much about testing on as many backends as people are interested in. So I think when you boil down technically, it's a fan out of the testing infrastructure behind the code, and any cross compilation you need to support that. So in principle it could, but on the other hand, in the interest of making tangible progress, it's probably good to keep a little bit more narrow to start out with.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's basically where people bring interest. If it's not a stretch architecturally, and I don't know that it would be, to include different cloud-based target backends, then fine.
Right. And then I think for a lot of tier 2 or tier 3 service providers, they may not have the operational or support or something like that. So potentially, I think some vendors will probably be interested to provide the service to the tier 2, tier 3 service providers, right? So, and instead of putting the pod, locally or the compute locally to the device, they can just use the private cloud.
Yeah.
Oh, just two comments on the private cloud. I think that we run the control software in different environments. We run it on EC2, we run it on single nodes, we run on multi-nodes, and as long as the Kubernetes version is compatible, I don't see big issues there. We never tried running the control software on a public or private cloud that is far away from the access device. In theory, there are no issues there, but there may be some issues with the latency added to the packet in, packet out in the software. So it's not really only an architectural thing, I believe.
Yeah, I think that has a SEBA as a service. That has a good ring to it, and that for tier 2 and tier 3 guys, like Sean said, I would think that would be of potential interest to them without having to invest in their own infrastructure. So maybe that's something that could be tested.
Well, we can take it on here. I think SEBA as a service is a great idea. Maybe that's its own brigade. I don't know. This might be stretching the intent here. I don't know.
Yeah, okay, it may be. Sorry, I didn't want to derail things. Sorry.
No. But I think that I don't know. I don't know what they do on the ONF Connect. There will be more talk about the SEBA as a service. But as I said, SEBA as a service, I think can be a very attractive option.
Absolutely.
So there also has been brought up because switch hardware is getting more and more powerful, and maybe going off of what Chip was mentioning, people have been considering using the compute inside switches and other stuff to run the control plane. For example, ONOS actually running on the switch it's running on, which is kind of an interesting concept if you think of it as disaggregating the control plane, but it's you're just using using the compute that's already in place. So that would also be something that would be an interesting area to explore. And it could
right, it could be on the switch side, right? But at the same time, maybe Jeff, you can make a comment here. Is potentially Volta itself can be instantiated inside the OOT itself, right? So so maybe that, I don't know whether that just Volta alone, but whether you want to you want to put the ONOS also on board on the OOT or not, that's a different story. But I think they are different variants, and then definitely you have the switch and then put the BNG function on that switch. I think that can be done.
Okay, thanks, John. I wanted to go over a few of the technical details just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. So I went into the technical starting points in this email. So there's a lot of discussion, especially in Acrano, about setting up a lab environment. And there's a page on the SEBA or on the Cord guide that goes through how to configure a lab setup to do testing and hook up through physical OLT and ONU hardware. This would be what we'd recommend people have in order to test with real hardware their SEBA pod. And also, I mean, this also applies to Volta because this is testing the Volta data plane. Then I talked about the certification brigade, what they've been covering, which is PON and switch hardware. Further down, the other thing that was interested people was generating artifacts. So we have a guide, a part of the guide that goes over how we test and release software, how versioning works, how container images are published. One of the things I think that this brigade is going to need to do, especially for creating multi-arch, probably most likely at the beginning, x86 and ARM Docker images. We may have to modify how the image creation process so that it builds and creates manifests and integrates those. So that would be one thing that would need to happen. Also, the actual hardware that is being used to generate those images or the EC2 instances, we'd have to figure out how to have that have those get spun up and figure out who ends up who those get billed to and that sort of thing. And then I talked about how that didn't come through quite. Ken, I'm getting really garbled. Okay, well, we'll wait and see if the audio gets better. So then I went through how our SEBA process is working, how we're building on EC2, how we're using Jenkins Job Builder. There's a link to the README that's how Jenkins Job Builder works and how you contribute code that would help that happen. So I hopefully this will spark some interest in figuring out a topology and the tasks needed to get multiple architecture Docker images and other artifacts created. Are there any questions about this?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So regarding the CI, I think the first step is to start building the images, and I haven't gone through your email. Thanks a lot for making it. I guess my first question is, what kind of system do you have to build the images? Do you spawn dynamically the Jenkins slaves, or do you have static Jenkins slave?
We're dynamically spinning them up. If you look at the Jenkins instance, when a job gets run, so for example, let's look at the published jobs. Let's look at the published jobs for Volta-Go. So when this job spins up, it will run. I'll link to. So this is building.
Yeah, and it's similar to what a Crano has. Yeah.
Yeah, it runs dynamically on EC2. It spins up a 1 core 2 gigabyte Ubuntu image. And
Okay,
so this we need to figure out and get ARM images of those, and then
yeah. Thing is that I'm not sure that we actually have like that much available hardware to both like have a cloud available for the build jobs and another three targets for the testing. And what we've done in Akrano was connect to static Jenkins slaves, and the build that is done on ARM is done on those directly. So you do it directly on the hardware. You don't do it in a VM that's spun up dynamically. Do you think that's something that we can replicate here as well?
We could definitely look into doing that. One of the issues that we've had that's totally unrelated to this is the system we have for doing VPNs goes from this Jenkins cloud infrastructure through ONF's Office data center, and then out to other parties. And one of the issues we've had is that that VPN has been pretty touchy. We've occasionally made what we thought were benign changes, and it took down the VPN connections for a large period of time. So we're working at re-engineering that. I'm not sure what the ETA is on that. So while we could probably try to set up some VPN connections, it may be that we need to engineer that differently.
Okay. Yeah, well, we have the lab linked to Linux Foundation through VPN, and so far we didn't hit any issues with that. So I understand you have a different system, but we can start somewhere.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay.
Alrighty. I think this covers that topic. We are actively looking for somebody to help lead the brigade. If anyone would like to take part in that, that would be very useful. I have, of course, limited bandwidth. I can help technically, but I'm not. All organizational tasks are going to fall to someone else. Okay, are there any other questions or topics that we'd like to discuss? All right, I'm going to end the meeting. Thank you, everyone. We'll talk. We don't have anything for the next week, but we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.